going to turn over to Jennifer Simon, and she can just tell you from her heart. At the end, I'm going to ask her, out of everything that she experienced when she was in the emergency room with her husband, what is the one thing that Jennifer believes is most important to know for anyone who finds themselves in an emergency room with their loved one?
My husband and I have been married for 33 years. We live in Snohomish, Washington on a nice little horse farm, and it's a lovely life. My husband was a pilot. He had to have flight physicals every 6 months, and he flew 737, 400s, Lear jets, all manner of airplanes, so they monitored his health closely. And in 1999, they found out he had a heart murmur, and he was under treatment for that with a cardiologist, and he had a aortic valve insufficiency, and the first thing they did was to help him regulate his blood pressure, which was high, and he monitored it and controlled it beautifully. His cardiologist raved about what a good patient he was. And he felt good, he looked wonderful, and he was actually still running marathons, and had ran a marathon about a month before he died. And on this beautiful Saturday morning, we were just talking about going to a movie, and he was in the next room, and I heard him cry out my name. I ran to him and caught him as he was sliding to the floor. I called 911, got us to the hospital. My first indication something was not at all right was the fact that he did not know what city he lived in. He didn't know what year it was. He thought it was 1998. He didn't know who the president was. He only knew my name and his name. He was telling the doctors that his pain was 10 out of 10. I was very scared. He was scared and anxious. But I didn't want him to see my fear, thinking it would make it worse for him. The young doctor that came in asked a few questions. They did one EKG, one chest x-ray, and one blood enzyme test. He came back in about 20 minutes after we'd gotten there and told us there was absolutely nothing wrong with Ken. That he looked healthy and fine. His heart was a little enlarged, but that was normal for a long-distance runner, someone who was running marathons. He told us flat out, with no compassion, no kindness. He said, "Go home. There's nothing wrong with you. Go home." And I said, no, absolutely not. There's something very, very wrong. I said, "We are not leaving. We are not going anywhere." So then he essentially negotiated with me and said, "Well, we'll do a couple more blood tests, and I'll call the clinic and talk to his cardiologist. But there's nothing wrong, so just get your mind right, you're going home." That was at 1:20. At 3, sometime after 3, he came back, said the blood tests again showed nothing wrong. There was a slight elevation in the troponin, but then it went back down again, and then it came back up again. He said, so that didn't make any sense. And so his pain level had been 10 out of 10, and then it vacillated. Sometimes it would go down to 5 out of 10. He was incoherent, unable to answer questions and speak, and then he was bright and was able to talk, not himself at all, but still able to answer a few questions and seemed to be more cheerful. So they said there absolutely was nothing wrong, we had to go home. And I said, unless you're planning to throw us on the street, we're going nowhere. There's something very, very wrong, we need help. And again, the same thing. He said he was going off duty and he would humor us and allow us to stay for 2 more blood enzyme tests that would be 1 hour apart. But that they were just humoring us, and then we had to absolutely leave. So he went away, they did the blood tests. My husband sat quietly in pain, off and on, his pain level vacillated. And then at 6:28, the nurse had just been in and taken the last blood test and was said, figure out where you're going to dinner. We're going to send you home. And Ken started to pull at his IVs, and he was uncomfortable and agitated and anxious. And I went up and I held his hands and I said, honey, look at the clock. It's 6:28. They'll be back here any minute and the nurse will take out your IVs. And he said, no, please take them out. You know how to take them out. And I said, no, they'll get mad at us, and tried to joke with him. As I stepped back, I put his hands under the blanket and held his hands for a moment. Then I stepped back one step away from him. He cried out, before I sat down, he cried out, oh no. He clutched his sternum and he collapsed and he died. That was at 6:28, and we had come into the emergency room before 1 o'clock, just before 1 o'clock. I rang the call button. I was talking to him saying, please, don't leave me, don't leave me. And then nobody answered the call button. So I went running up and down the hallway, screaming for help. And no one came. And the time frame was a minimum of 11 minutes, perhaps as much as 14 minutes, before the doctors and the group came in the room. I had backed away from Ken because I saw them coming through the window. I'd been going up and down the hallways 3 different times, screaming for help. No, I couldn't find anyone to get dragged back into the room. They came in and the doctor put his hands on his hips, turned, not looking at Ken, turned to me on his left, hands on his hips, and said, what's he up to now? And I just screamed, just look at him. They turned and looked at him, and of course then, and the 5 or 6 people with him all never looked at Ken. They all looked at me to let me know I was misbehaving. Then they turned and looked at Ken, and this was a different doctor because the shift had changed. He started screaming, what did he present with? So not only did he not know Ken was in trouble, he didn't even know why we were there. So I think they, of course, worked diligently at CPR and tried to clot buster, They were under the assumption from what was going on that he had thrown a clot. They were having lots of trouble, and I got drug away down to the little room down the hallway, and the doctor came back and said they'd done everything they could. I think the one thing I would take away is the doctors can't find what they're not looking for. And I understood that Ken was hooked up on all these monitors, that someone was reading the results. There was a screen in the nurse's station, but nobody was monitoring that. And I had seen his blood pressure, heart rate and blood pressure vacillate and go up and down. His heartbeat raised up to as much as 300 beats per minute at times. And nobody came to see why. Just because they're hooked up to all the monitors doesn't mean there's somebody receiving the information on the other end. I wish now that I had drugged the doctor into the hallway and pitched a fit, and somehow impressed with him how upset I was. I thought the fact that I yelled and screamed and said, no, we're not leaving, and he allowed us to stay, that while we were waiting for 6 hours, someone was continuing to try and find out what was wrong. But they weren't. As Kim died, I could hear the machines, all the monitors behind me going tick, tick, tick. Not only were they not monitoring the machines, they turned the alarms off. So he died with no alarms, just me begging him to stay. So they cannot find what they're not looking for, and yes, be your family's advocate.